Hey guys, Zane here with another One Take review, and today I want to talk about the new Moor album, Jazz Codes. Jazz Codes is the latest studio album from poet slash political activist slash musician slash pretty much everything under the sun, Moor. Moor is always a very experimental individual, and her work on previous records and in her collaborations with a number of other artists have left her a very polarizing figure within the music world, as she is truly genreless and arguably a poet before an actual musician, ultimately resulting in something that really a lot of people love or hate. Some people consider her concepts delivered in her music to be nothing but experimental gibberish that really serves no purpose within the realm of actual music, and other people see it as very profound and powerful poetry put to highly experimental music, and Jazz Codes kind of fits in the middle of that. The poetry found on Jazz Codes is actually very strong overall, though certainly not the best ever found on a Moor record. Nonetheless, songs like Barely Woke and Ode to Mary have a very strong style of poetry that is very striking to the listener, even with a very experimental instrumental style that can often be very subtle, and in turn causing the poetry itself to be very subtle, as the poetry takes up a sort of classic beat style of influence with a modernized and often intelligently politicized twist. The number of features that come from other producers and other front people, other poets similar to Moor are also very strong as well, and obviously very passionately well picked out, as they all suit the record in various ways overall, resulting in Jazz Codes feeling like an intelligently put together and very confidently put together record. Now, that's not to say this is a great record per se, it's just that Moor obviously knew what she was doing when she made it. Similar to many previous Moor records, Jazz Codes is just a little too out there for its own good more often than not. While the experimentalism is undeniably respectable from an artistic standpoint, it doesn't necessarily translate to a good listen overall, and the generally ominous tone that plagues the record ultimately ends up taking away and drawing attention away from the lyrical centerpiece that really needs to be the defining aspect for a Moor record to work. Unfortunately, rather than complement the poetry or act as a mighty beast all on its own separate from any other aspect of Jazz Codes, the experimentalist aspect of this album sees the woman behind the record just kind of do nothing spectacular, while also really drawing attention away from what could make it a better record than it otherwise would be. Beyond that, many tracks on Jazz Codes just simply don't live up to their full potential. The choice to make a reasonably large project full of songs that often are less than 3.5 minutes maximum results in something that sees the listener just be handed a number of songs that feel like they go nowhere and fail to progress at all. This means that the aforementioned aggressive experimentalist aspect of Jazz Codes is really not super heavily built upon on certain songs, which means that certain songs just don't go anywhere, and the conceptual ideas that are first introduced in these tracks, these experimental concepts and ideas, aren't really developed throughout that individual song's runtime before you are already moving on to the next song. This can ultimately leave things feeling a little bit empty and the experimentalism slightly pointless at times. I mean, why experiment when you really aren't going to do anything interesting with it and you're going to throw out a certain idea before moving on to the next thing without really explaining why that idea was good in the first place through the music? Again, the experiments that are delivered on Jazz Codes are very respectful from an artistic standpoint, but at the same time, it just really does feel like certain things here are underbaked, to say the least, and overall, I wouldn't say that this record, at least in that aspect, is good in the traditional sense of the word. Sure, if you are kind of an art snob, music snob like myself, you'll probably find something to enjoy and hear from a pretentious mindset, but if you're just a casual listener looking for something mildly experimental to enjoy, this will be a very difficult listen to stomach, as this really isn't something that you can just listen to casually. In fact, it's kind of difficult to listen to whatsoever. I mean, it's a very powerful album with strong lyrics, but it's completely dragged down by the fact that the experimental aspects of it truly add nothing and ultimately detract from the overall listening experience. So overall, Jazz Codes definitely could have been a lot worse, but it is far from being even a good album, as it can really only be enjoyed if you are really into a sort of poetic experimental side of music, particularly that poetic side, as the experimentalism really doesn't work out. I'm going to give More Mothers a Jazz Codes 3 stars out of 5. My one take on this record is that although Jazz Codes' experimentation is done somewhat haphazardly to say the least, a real understanding of genuinely personal poetry as well as a solid selection of collaborations ultimately results in something that, although not nearly as good as it could have or should have been, is still pretty decent overall. So again, 3 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.